The sun was already high in the sky when Linda finally reached the gates of the Double R Ranch. Her feet ached from the 3-mile walk, and she could feel blisters forming inside her old shoes. But she couldn't stop now. This was her last chance. Her 7-year-old daughter, Rose, held onto her left hand tightly. On her right side, 5-year-old Billy dragged his feet in the dust, too tired to complain anymore. They had left their small rented room in town before dawn, and the August heat was becoming unbearable. Linda's heart pounded as she saw a man on horseback approaching. This had to be him. Jacob Rivers, the owner of the biggest ranch in the county. She had asked around town for weeks, gathering courage, learning everything she could about him. People said he was fair but tough. They said he didn't waste time on excuses or sob stories. She had practiced what she would say 100 times. But now, as he got closer and she could see his weathered face and sharp eyes, all those careful words seemed to disappear from her mind. Jacob pulled his horse to a stop near the gate. He looked down at the thin woman and her 2 children with curiosity. It wasn't common for strangers to walk all the way out here, especially not women with small kids in this heat. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep and carried the authority of a man used to giving orders. Linda's throat felt dry. She swallowed hard and forced herself to speak. "Mr. Rivers, my name is Linda Cooper. I heard your cook quit last month. I need work." "I can cook."
"I can clean."
"I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired." Jacob studied her face. She was probably in her early 30s, though the worry lines on her forehead made her look older. Her dress was clean but patched in several places. The children behind her looked scared but well-behaved. "I've got 3 men coming tomorrow to interview for the cook position," Jacob said, not unkindly. "All of them have worked on ranches before." Linda felt her last hope slipping away. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "I'm not pretty, but I can cook and earn a living for my kids. Please, sir, just give me a chance to show you." The raw honesty in her voice made Jacob pause. In his 20 years of running this ranch, he had heard plenty of people begging for work. But there was something different about this woman. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't crying or trying to manipulate him with tears. She was simply stating facts and asking for a fair shot. "Why do you need work so badly?" he asked, climbing down from his horse. Linda took a deep breath. "My husband died 6 months ago. Logging accident up north. He was a good man, worked hard, but we never had much saved. After he passed, the bills started piling up. Medical expenses from his accident, funeral costs, rent. I've been doing washing and mending for people in town, but it's not enough. The bank is going to take our house next month. I've got nowhere else to go." She glanced down at her children, and Jacob saw the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. "I just need a chance to prove myself. I can make biscuits that melt in your mouth. I know how to stretch a food budget. My grandmother raised me, and she cooked for farm crews during the hard times. She taught me everything she knew." Rose tugged on her mother's dress. "Mama makes the best apple pie," the little girl added shyly. Despite himself, Jacob felt a small smile tug at his lips. He looked at the boy, who was trying very hard to look brave despite the tears gathering in his eyes. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. He was thinking about old Pete, his last cook, who had made food that was barely edible. His ranch hands had been complaining for weeks. He had interviews lined up, yes, but none of those men had impressed him much when he'd spoken to them briefly in town. "You ever cooked for a dozen hungry men who've been working since sunrise?" he asked. "No, sir," Linda admitted, "but I've cooked for church gatherings. 50 people at a time. And I learn fast. I don't waste food and I don't waste time." Jacob crossed his arms, considering. He had a rule about not making quick decisions, but he also trusted his gut, and something told him this woman was telling the truth about her abilities. "Here's what I'll do," he said finally. "I'll give you 2 weeks. Trial period. You'll cook 3 meals a day for my crew. That's 12 men, plus yourself and your kids. You'll get room and board in the small cabin out back, plus $20 a week during the trial." Linda's eyes went wide. $20 was more than she had hoped for. "If my men are happy with your cooking after 2 weeks, the job is yours permanent. $30 a week, the cabin stays yours, and your kids can go to the school in town. I'll have one of the hands drive them there and back each day." "And if they're not happy?" Linda asked quietly. "Then you'll get your 2 weeks' pay and I'll help you find something else in town." Fair? It was more than fair. It was generous. Linda felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "When do I start?" "Right now. Let me show you to the cabin." You can get settled and I'll introduce you to the crew at supper time. That gives you about 4 hours to figure out what you're going to cook. As Jacob led them through the ranch gates, little Billy spoke up for the first time. Mister, do you got any horses we can see? Jacob looked down at the boy. I've got about 40 horses on this ranch, son. Once your mama gets settled, maybe we'll find time for you to meet a few. Billy's face lit up and Linda felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The cabin Jacob showed them was small but sturdy. It had 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen area, and best of all, it was clean. After months of living in a single rented room above the general store, where the walls were thin and the roof leaked, this felt like a palace. There's a well out back for water, Jacob explained. Main ranch house is just up that path. That's where the kitchen is, where you'll be doing most of your work. You'll find everything you need there. Pantry is stocked. After he left, Linda sat down on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe. Rose and Billy were already exploring every corner of their new home, their excitement barely contained. Mama, there's a real stove, Rose called out. And look, Billy, we got our own beds, her brother added. Linda closed her eyes and said a silent prayer of thanks. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and headed to the main house. She had 4 hours to prepare a meal that would determine her family's future. When she walked into the ranch kitchen, she found it bigger than she expected, with a large cast-iron stove, plenty of counter space, and cupboards full of supplies. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By 6 o'clock that evening, when 12 tired ranch hands filed into the dining hall, the smell of fresh-baked bread, roasted chicken, and apple cobbler filled the air. The men looked at each other in surprise. Jacob watched from the doorway as Linda served the meal with quiet efficiency. Her hands shook slightly, but her face was determined. The first ranch hand to take a bite of the chicken stopped chewing and looked up in surprise. Ma'am, this is real good. Another tried the bread and nodded appreciatively. Best biscuits I've had since my mama's. By the time the apple cobbler was served, the dining hall was filled with the sounds of satisfied eating and appreciative murmurs. Jacob caught Linda's eye across the room and gave her a small nod. She had done it. She had bought herself 2 weeks. As Linda walked back to the cabin that night with Rose and Billy sleepy on either side of her, she allowed herself a small smile. They were going to be okay. She would make sure of it. Whatever it took, she would prove that she belonged here. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the horizon when Linda woke up the next morning. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. The ranch, the job, the chance to save her family. She got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Rose and Billy, who were still sleeping peacefully in the small bed across the room. They looked so innocent, so trusting. They believed their mama could fix everything. And she would. She had to. Linda splashed cold water on her face from the basin and tied her hair back in a simple bun. Her hands were already sore from yesterday's work, but she ignored the pain. Pain meant nothing when her children's future was at stake. By 4:30, she was in the main kitchen, firing up the massive stove. She had learned yesterday where everything was kept. Now it was time to prove that yesterday's meal wasn't just beginner's luck. The ranch hands started arriving at 5:30, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. They looked surprised to see her already there, with coffee brewing and the smell of bacon filling the air. "Morning, ma'am," said Tom, the oldest of the crew. He had kind eyes and a gray beard. "You're up early." "Morning comes early on a ranch," Linda replied with a small smile. "Coffee's ready and breakfast will be on the table in 10 minutes. She served them eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of toast with butter and jam. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had hard physical work ahead of them. There wasn't much talk, but Linda noticed the empty plates and the second helping several men took. Jacob arrived just as the crew was finishing up. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching Linda clean up with efficient movements. "The men seem satisfied," he said simply. "I hope so, sir," Linda replied, scrubbing a pan. "Just Jacob, no need for sir." She glanced at him, surprised. In her experience, wealthy men insisted on formality. "All right, Jacob." He nodded and left to start his own workday. Linda finished cleaning and then hurried back to the cabin to wake up Rose and Billy. She made them a simple breakfast and sat with them while they ate. "Mama, can we explore today?" Billy asked, his mouth full of toast. "You can play near the cabin, but don't wander far. And stay away from the horses unless someone is with you. Deal?" Both children nodded eagerly. The days fell into a rhythm. Linda woke before dawn, prepared 3 meals a day, cleaned the kitchen, and fell into bed exhausted each night. Her body ached constantly. The work was harder than anything she had done before. Kneading dough for 12 loaves of bread made her arms burn. Standing over the hot stove in the August heat left her dizzy. The massive cast-iron pots were so heavy that lifting them made her back scream in protest. But she never complained. Not once. By the 4th day, she noticed the ranch hands coming to meals with more enthusiasm. They started arriving a few minutes early, drawn by the smells from the kitchen. Tom told her that her cornbread was the best he'd ever tasted. Another hand, a quiet young man named Pete, shyly asked if she could make that beef stew again. On the 5th morning, Linda was surprised when the ranch foreman, a serious man named Frank, stopped by the kitchen after breakfast. "Mrs. Cooper, got a minute?" he asked. Linda's heart sank. Was something wrong? Had she made a mistake? "Of course," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Frank shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Just wanted to say the men are real happy with the food. Best cooking we've had in years." Old Pete, he meant well, but his food was tough as leather. "You've got a gift." Relief washed over Linda. "Thank you. That means a lot." Boss is pleased too, though he won't say it out loud. But I've known Jacob for 15 years. I can tell. After Frank left, Linda allowed herself a moment of pride. She was doing it. She was actually doing it. Meanwhile, Rose and Billy were adjusting to their new life. The other ranch families had children, and slowly her kids were making friends. She could hear Billy's laughter sometimes when he played near the creek with the other boys. Rose had found a friend in the school teacher's daughter, who came to visit on weekends. One evening, as Linda was finishing up the dinner cleanup, Jacob came into the kitchen. He watched her work for a moment before speaking. "Your 2 weeks are up tomorrow," he said. Linda's hands froze in the soapy water. She turned to face him, trying to read his expression. Jacob's face was unreadable as always, but then the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "The men took a vote this afternoon. 12-0. They want you to stay." The dish Linda was holding slipped from her fingers and splashed back into the water. "Really? Really? The job is yours permanently. $30 a week, the cabin is yours as long as you work here, and the kids can start school next week. I'll have Tom drive them in his wagon each morning." Linda felt tears burning in her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but it was no use. They spilled down her cheeks as months of fear and worry finally released their grip on her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to us." Jacob looked uncomfortable with her tears. "You earned it. You work harder than any cook I've ever had. The men are happy, which means they work better. That's good for the ranch." But there was something in his voice, something softer than just business appreciation. Linda noticed but said nothing. "There's one more thing," Jacob continued. "Winter's coming in a few months. The cabin you're in now isn't insulated well. I'm going to have some of the men add weather stripping and fix up the stove before the cold sets in. Can't have my cook getting sick, and that's very kind of you." "It's practical," he said gruffly. But again his eyes told a different story. After he left, Linda sat down at the kitchen table and let herself cry properly. These weren't tears of sadness or fear anymore. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope finally blooming again in her heart. When she returned to the cabin that night, Rose and Billy were playing a game with some wooden blocks that Tom had carved for them. "Mama, guess what?" Rose said excitedly. "Mrs. Patterson says I can go to school with her daughter next week." "I know, sweetheart. Isn't that wonderful?" Billy looked up from his blocks. "And Mr. Tom said he'll teach me to ride a horse." "A real horse, Mama!" Linda knelt down and hugged both her children tight. "We're going to be okay now," she told them. "We're really going to be okay." That night, after the children were asleep, Linda sat on the small porch of their cabin and looked up at the stars. 6 months ago, when David had died, she thought her world had ended. She had been so scared, so lost, so certain that she couldn't survive without him. But she had survived. More than that, she had fought for her children. She had walked 3 miles in the August heat to ask for a job. She had worked until her hands bled and her back ached. She had proven that a woman without beauty or wealth could still have value, could still earn her place in the world. The night air was cool on her face. And for the first time since becoming a widow, Linda felt something close to peace. Inside the main ranch house, Jacob sat at his desk trying to focus on the ranch accounts, but his mind kept wandering to the woman in the cabin, He had hired her because he needed a cook, and she had proven to be an excellent one. That should be the end of it, but he found himself thinking about her more than he should. The way she never complained despite the hard work. The fierce love in her eyes when she looked at her children. The dignity she carried herself with, even in her worn, patched dress. Jacob shook his head, trying to clear these thoughts. He had sworn after his wife died 5 years ago that he would never let anyone that close again. The pain of loss had been too great. Work was safer. The ranch was predictable, but something about Linda Cooper was making him question that decision. He pushed the thought away and returned to his accounts. Some things were better left alone. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning. That the simple agreement between an employer and employee would grow into something neither of them expected. That life, despite their careful plans and protective walls, had other ideas entirely. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Linda's life, but also the most rewarding. Every morning started the same way. The alarm clock would ring at 4 a.m, and Linda would force her tired body out of bed. Her muscles had learned to ache in new ways. Her shoulders burned from lifting heavy pots. Her feet throbbed from standing all day. Her hands were covered in small cuts and burns from the kitchen work, but she never missed a single morning. Not one. By the time the ranch hands arrived for breakfast, the kitchen would be warm and filled with the smell of fresh coffee and whatever she had prepared. Some mornings it was pancakes with syrup. Other days it was eggs and sausage with hash browns. She learned each man's preferences. Tom liked his eggs scrambled. Pete preferred his coffee black and strong. Frank always wanted an extra biscuit to take with him for his mid-morning break. These small details mattered. Linda understood that feeding people wasn't just about putting food on the table. It was about making them feel cared for, noticed, valued. Her grandmother had taught her that years ago. The ranch hands began to change in their attitude toward her. At first, they had been polite but distant. A widow woman with 2 kids was a curiosity, not quite fitting into the rough world of ranch life. But as the days passed, they started to warm up to her. Tom became like a grandfather to Rose and Billy. He carved them toys and told them stories about the old days. Pete, despite his shyness, taught Billy how to whistle. Frank's wife brought over some of her children's old clothes for Rose and Billy, saying they no longer needed them. Linda was grateful for every kindness, but she never took advantage. She worked harder than anyone expected. When she finished preparing meals, she cleaned the kitchen until it sparkled. She organized the pantry, making lists of what supplies were running low. She found ways to use leftovers so nothing went to waste. When she discovered a batch of apples going soft, she made applesauce and apple butter that lasted for weeks. The ranch hands noticed. They started calling her Miss Linda, with genuine respect in their voices. The skepticism had disappeared, replaced by appreciation. Rose and Billy were thriving too. School had started and Tom drove them into town every morning in his wagon. Rose loved reading and was already at the top of her class. Billy made friends quickly and came home every day with stories about what he had learned. Linda watched her children bloom and felt a deep satisfaction. This was what she had fought for. This was why she pushed through the pain and exhaustion every single day. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after Linda had started working permanently, Jacob came into the kitchen while she was preparing dinner. This wasn't unusual anymore. He had started stopping by more often, sometimes to discuss supplies, sometimes just to pour himself a coffee and watch her work. "The men are talking," he said, leaning against the counter. Linda's hands paused in the middle of chopping vegetables. "About what?" "About how this is the best food they've ever had on any ranch. Frank said 2 other ranches tried to hire Tom away last month, offering better wages. Tom told them he wouldn't leave because of your cooking." Linda felt her cheeks flush. "That's kind of him to say." "It's not kindness. It's truth. You've got a real talent, Linda." It was the first time he had called her by her first name without the Mrs. Cooper attached to it. Something about the way he said it made her heart skip slightly. She pushed the feeling away and went back to her chopping. "I just cook the way my grandmother taught me. Nothing special." "It's special when it keeps good men from leaving," Jacob said. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the small kitchen table. "Tell me about your grandmother." Linda was surprised by the question. Jacob rarely asked personal things. Their conversations usually stayed safely on topics like food supplies and ranch business. "Her name was Dorothy," Linda said, continuing her work as she talked. She raised me after my mother died when I was 8. My father worked on the railroad and was gone most of the time. Grandma Dorothy was tough as nails but had the kindest heart. She used to cook for farm crews during harvest season, sometimes 30 or 40 men at a time. That's where you learned? Every summer from age 9 until I got married. She taught me that cooking was about more than just food. It was about dignity. She used to say, "When you feed someone well, you're telling them they matter." I never forgot that. Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Your husband was a lucky man." The words hung in the air. Linda didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. After Jacob left, she found herself thinking about that conversation, about the way he had looked at her when he said those words. She shook her head. She was being foolish. Jacob was her employer, nothing more. She couldn't afford to think otherwise. But late at night, when the children were asleep and she was alone with her thoughts, she couldn't help but notice how her life had changed. She had a safe place to live. Her children were happy and healthy. She had meaningful work that used her skills. And sometimes when Jacob looked at her with those thoughtful eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen, not as a poor widow, not as a charity case, but as a person with value, with abilities, with worth. One evening, disaster almost struck. Linda was carrying a large pot of stew when her worn shoe caught on a loose floorboard. She stumbled, and the pot tilted dangerously. Hot stew sloshed toward the edge. Jacob, who had just walked in, moved fast. He caught the pot before it could spill, his strong hands steadying it along with her shaking ones. For a moment they stood there, hands touching on the pot handles, faces closer than they had ever been. Linda could smell leather and pine and something else, something uniquely him. "Careful," he said softly. "Thank you," she whispered. They set the pot down safely, and Jacob knelt to examine the loose floorboard. "This needs fixing. Could have been dangerous. It's fine, really. I should have been watching where I was going. It's not fine. You could have been burned." There was an edge to his voice, something almost angry. "I'll have it fixed tomorrow." That night, Linda lay awake thinking about the concern in his voice, the way his hands had been so gentle when he helped her, the way he had looked at her like her safety actually mattered to him. She was falling into dangerous territory, and she knew it. She was starting to care about Jacob Rivers as more than just her employer. And that was a problem, because women like her didn't end up with men like him. The next morning, 3 ranch hands showed up to fix not just the loose floorboard, but every squeaky board in the kitchen. They also repaired a window that didn't close properly and fixed the door that always stuck. "Boss's orders," Tom said with a knowing smile. "Said he wants this kitchen safe for you." Linda thanked them, but inside her heart was confused. These weren't the actions of a man who just valued a good cook. These were the actions of someone who cared. But she pushed the thought away. She had 2 children to think about. She had a job to keep. She couldn't risk either by imagining things that couldn't be. Still, when Jacob came by that evening and tested each floorboard to make sure it was solid, she caught herself smiling. And when he caught her smiling, he smiled back. It was a small moment, lasting only seconds, but Linda would remember it for a long time. The season was changing. Autumn was arriving, bringing cooler weather and beautiful colors to the trees around the ranch. The work continued hard as ever, but Linda no longer felt like she was just surviving. She was beginning to feel like she was living again. And somewhere in the back of her mind, despite all her warnings to herself, hope was beginning to grow. Not just hope for security or stability, but hope for something more, something she had thought was lost to her forever when her husband died. She didn't dare name it yet, but it was there, growing stronger each day, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through frozen ground. Jacob Rivers had always prided himself on being a practical man. He made decisions based on logic, not emotion. He ran his ranch with efficiency and fairness. After his wife Margaret died 5 years ago, he had built walls around his heart and told himself those walls would never come down. But lately, those walls were developing cracks. It started with small things. He found himself taking his morning coffee in the kitchen instead of his office. He told himself it was more convenient, that he needed to discuss the day's work with the hands anyway. But the truth was different. He wanted to see Linda. He noticed things about her that had nothing to do with her cooking skills. The way she hummed softly when she worked, old songs that reminded him of his own mother, the way she always saved the best pieces of meat for Rose and Billy's plates, taking the smallest portions for herself, the way her face lit up when her children came home from school, even though she was exhausted from working all day. One morning, he watched her teaching Billy how to tie his boots properly. The boy was struggling with the laces, getting frustrated. Linda knelt down, her patience endless, showing him again and again until he got it right. When Billy finally succeeded, the pride on both their faces made something in Jacob's chest tighten. This woman had been through so much, losing her husband, facing poverty, walking 3 miles in the heat with 2 small children just to beg for a job. She had every reason to be bitter, to be broken. But instead, she worked with dignity, loved her children with fierce devotion, and brought warmth to a ranch that had felt cold for too long. Jacob found himself looking for excuses to talk to her. He asked about supplies they didn't really need to discuss. He lingered over his coffee longer than necessary. He noticed the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the way her plain features became beautiful when she smiled at her children. He also noticed how thin she was. Despite her excellent cooking, she barely ate. One evening, he stayed late in the kitchen after the hands had left and watched her prepare plates for Rose and Billy. She gave them generous portions, then served herself barely half of what they got. "You need to eat more," he said, surprising both of them with the directness of his statement. Linda looked up, startled. "I eat enough. You don't. You're working yourself too hard and not taking care of yourself." "I'm fine, Jacob, really. You're not fine. You're exhausted. When's the last time you took a day off?" Linda couldn't remember. Since starting work 2 months ago, she hadn't missed a single day. The men need to eat. The men can survive on sandwiches for 1 day. You're taking Sunday off this week. That's an order, not a request. Linda wanted to argue, but the look on his face told her it would be pointless. All right, Sunday. What she didn't know was that Jacob had already spoken to Frank's wife, asking her to prepare meals for the crew that day. He wanted Linda to rest, to have time with her children, to not worry about work for 1 single day. The more time Jacob spent around Linda, the more he saw her strength. But he also saw how the other ranch hands' wives treated her. Most were kind, but there was always a distance. Linda was the cook, the employee, the widow who lived in the small cabin. She wasn't quite one of them. One afternoon, Jacob overheard a conversation that made his blood boil. He was in the barn when 2 ranch hands came in, not knowing he was there. "My wife says Linda's getting ideas above her station," one of them said, "acting like she belongs here permanently." "Well, she does cook good," the other replied. "But yeah, she's just the hired help. Widow woman with 2 kids and no prospects. My wife says she's probably hoping to catch a husband among the crew." Jacob stepped out from behind the hay bales, his face like thunder. Both men went pale. "Linda Cooper is the best cook this ranch has ever had," Jacob said, his voice cold and hard. "She works harder than both of you combined. She has earned respect and she will get it. If I hear either of you, or your wives, or anyone else on this ranch speaking disrespectfully about her again, you'll be looking for work elsewhere. Is that clear?" Both men nodded quickly, stammering apologies. "Now get back to work." After they left, Jacob stood in the barn, his hands clenched into fists. The words had hit too close to something he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The idea of Linda being interested in any of the ranch hands made him unreasonably angry. And that anger told him something he had been trying to deny. He was developing feelings for her. Real feelings. That evening, as Jacob was walking past the small cabin, he heard crying. Not Linda, but young Billy. The boy was sitting behind the cabin, his face buried in his hands. "What's wrong, son?" Jacob asked, sitting down beside him. Billy looked up, his eyes red. "Some boys at school said mean things about Mama today." Jacob felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of things?" "They said she's just a widow lady who can't catch a husband. They said that's why she has to work like a man." They laughed at her. Jacob put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Those boys are wrong, Billy. Your mama is one of the strongest, bravest people I've ever met. She took care of you and your sister when times were hard. She walked miles to find work. She works every day to give you a good life. That's not something to laugh at. That's something to admire. Really, really. And Billy, if those boys say things like that again, you tell your teacher. And you tell me, all right?" Billy nodded, wiping his eyes. "Your mama is a remarkable woman. Don't you ever forget that." Later that night, Jacob found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about Billy's tears, about the cruel words people said, about Linda's quiet dignity in the face of hardship. He thought about his own wife, Margaret. She had been beautiful, graceful, educated. Everyone had said they were a perfect match, and he had loved her deeply. When she died in childbirth along with their baby, Jacob thought his heart had died too. For 5 years, he had kept everyone at a distance. He had focused only on the ranch, on work, on things he could control. He had told himself he would never love again because the pain of loss was too great. But Linda was different from Margaret in every way. She wasn't classically beautiful. She hadn't had an easy life. She had rough hands and worry lines on her forehead. But when she smiled at her children, when she spoke with quiet pride about her work, when she faced each day with determination despite her exhaustion, Jacob saw a different kind of beauty. He saw a woman who had been tested by life and hadn't broken. A woman who loved fiercely and worked honestly. A woman who asked for nothing but a fair chance and then exceeded every expectation. The next morning, Jacob made a decision. He started taking his dinner in the kitchen after the ranch hands had left, sitting at the small table while Linda cleaned up. At first, she was nervous, wondering if something was wrong. But gradually, these evening conversations became comfortable. They talked about simple things. The weather, the supplies needed for next week, how the children were doing in school. But underneath the simple words, something deeper was growing. One evening, Rose came to the kitchen looking for her mother. She stopped in the doorway, seeing Jacob and Linda talking quietly over coffee. "Mama, is Mr. Jacob staying for supper with us?" she asked hopefully. Linda looked flustered. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sure Mr. Jacob has his own supper waiting." "Actually," Jacob said, surprising himself, "I'd like that. If it's all right with your mama?" Rose clapped her hands happily. "Billy will be so excited. He's been practicing the songs you taught him." That night, Jacob sat at the small table in Linda's cabin, eating a simple meal of stew and bread with Linda and her children. Billy showed him how well he could whistle now. Rose read him a story from her school book. Linda watched with a mixture of happiness and worry in her eyes. When it was time for the children to go to bed, they both hugged Jacob goodnight naturally, as if he had always been part of their lives. After they were asleep, Linda walked Jacob to the door. "Thank you for being kind to them," she said softly. "They miss having a father figure. They're good kids. You've raised them well. I'm trying my best." "You're doing more than that, Linda. You're doing an amazing job." In the moonlight, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Sometimes I wonder if my best is enough." Without thinking, Jacob reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "It's more than enough. You're more than enough." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then Jacob pulled his hand back, said goodnight, and walked back to the main house. But as he lay in bed that night, he knew the truth he had been avoiding. He was falling in love with Linda Cooper, with her strength, her kindness, her courage, with the way she loved her children, with the quiet grace she brought to everything she did. The question was, what was he going to do about it? 3 months had passed since Linda started working at the ranch. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The work was still hard, but she no longer felt like she was barely surviving. Rose and Billy were thriving at school. The ranch hands treated her with genuine respect. And Jacob, well, Jacob had become a part of their lives in a way that both comforted and frightened her. She had started to feel safe. That was her first mistake. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Linda was in the middle of preparing lunch when Tom came into the kitchen, his face troubled. "Miss Linda, there's a man here asking for you. Says his name is Howard Blackwood. Says he knew your late husband." Linda's hands froze. Howard Blackwood. The name sent a chill down her spine. David had mentioned him a few times, always with a tone of regret. They had done some business together before David died, but Linda had never met the man personally. "Did he say what he wants?" "No, ma'am. Just that he needs to speak with you. He's waiting outside." Linda wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. The man standing by the gate was tall and thin, with slicked back hair and a suit that looked too expensive for a simple ranch visit. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Cooper?" he said, extending his hand.
"Howard Blackwood."
"I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a good man." Linda shook his hand reluctantly. Something about him made her skin crawl. "Thank you. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" "Perhaps we could speak somewhere private." Linda led him to a bench near the cabin, away from the main buildings. Her heart was pounding, though she didn't know why. Some instinct was telling her that whatever this man wanted, it wasn't good. Howard sat down and pulled out some papers from his jacket. "I'll get straight to the point, Mrs. Cooper. Your husband owed me money. Quite a bit of money, actually." Linda felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband and I were business partners for a time. We invested in a logging venture together. Unfortunately, David borrowed money from me to cover his share of the investment. He signed these promissory notes agreeing to pay me back." He handed her the papers. Linda's hands shook as she read them. The documents looked official, with David's signature at the bottom. The amount made her stomach turn. $3,000. It might as well have been $1 million. "This can't be right," she whispered. "David never mentioned any of this to me." "Many men keep business matters from their wives," Howard said smoothly. "It's quite common. But the debt remains, I'm afraid. Now that your husband has passed, the responsibility falls to you. I don't have $3,000. I barely make $30 a week. I understand that, which is why I'm prepared to be reasonable. I'll give you 6 months to pay. That's $2,000 in 6 months, and we can work out a payment plan for the rest." Linda's mind was reeling. $2,000 in 6 months? That was impossible. Even if she didn't eat, didn't buy clothes for the children, didn't spend a penny on anything, she couldn't save that much. "And if I can't pay?" Howard's smile turned cold. "Then I'll have no choice but to take you to court. The judge will likely garnish your wages, and given your situation, with 2 young children and no family support, the county might decide you're unable to provide for them properly. Children need stability, Mrs. Cooper." The threat was clear. If she didn't pay, she could lose her children. "I'll need time to think about this," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, but don't take too long. I'll be back next week for your answer." After Howard left, Linda sat on the bench, unable to move. The papers in her hands felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Just when she thought her life was finally stable, the ground had been pulled out from under her again. She didn't tell anyone at first. Not the ranch hands, not even Jacob. She tried to continue working as normal, but her mind was elsewhere. She burned a pot of beans, something she had never done before. She put salt instead of sugar in the morning coffee. The ranch hands noticed but said nothing, probably thinking she was just having an off day. That night, after Rose and Billy were asleep, Linda sat at her small table and looked at the papers again. She studied David's signature, trying to remember if he had ever mentioned Howard Blackwood or any business deals. But her husband had always handled their finances. She had trusted him completely. She did some calculations on a piece of paper. Even if she stopped eating entirely, even if she spent nothing on the children, she could maybe save $200 in 6 months. It wasn't even close to enough. The next few days were torture. Linda went through the motions of her work, but inside she was falling apart. She barely slept. When she did, she had nightmares about losing Rose and Billy, about them being taken away while she screamed helplessly. On the 4th day, Jacob found her sitting on the steps of her cabin late at night, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The children were asleep inside, and Linda had finally allowed herself to break down. "Linda," Jacob's voice was gentle but concerned. "What's wrong?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't meant for anyone to see her like this, especially not Jacob. But she was so tired of carrying this burden alone. "I'm going to lose everything," she said, her voice cracking. "Just when I thought we were safe, I'm going to lose everything." Jacob sat down beside her. "Tell me what happened." Through her tears, Linda told him everything. About Howard Blackwood, about the debt, about the threat to take her children if she couldn't pay. Jacob listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Let me see the papers." Linda retrieved them from inside the cabin. Jacob studied them by the porch light, his jaw tight. "Something doesn't feel right about this," he said finally. "Your husband died 6 months ago. Why is Blackwood only coming forward now? And why would David take out such a large loan without telling you? I don't know. But his signature is there. What can I do?" Jacob folded the papers carefully. "First, you're not going to face this alone. Second, I know a lawyer in town." "A good one. We're going to have him look at these papers. Jacob, I can't afford a lawyer. I can. Consider it a loan if you must, but we're fighting this. Why would you do this for me?" Jacob looked at her. and in the moonlight she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "Because you matter, Linda. You and your children matter, and I don't let people I care about get cheated." Linda felt fresh tears coming, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief that she wasn't alone anymore. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Let's see what the lawyer says first." The next morning, Jacob rode into town and returned with a lawyer named Charles Bennett. Charles was an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for honesty. He sat at Linda's small table and examined the promissory notes carefully. After nearly an hour, he looked up. "Mrs. Cooper, when exactly did your husband die?" "March 15th, and these notes are dated February 10th, less than 6 weeks before his death. Is that significant?" "It might be." "Tell me, was your husband ill before his accident?" Linda thought back. He had been complaining about headaches, and he seemed worried about something, but he wouldn't talk to me about it. Charles made some notes. "I'd like to investigate Mr. Blackwood's background. In my experience, men like him often have a pattern of preying on widows. If these notes are fraudulent, we'll find out. And if they're real," Linda asked quietly, "then we'll figure out a legal way to handle it that doesn't result in you losing your children. But let me do some digging first." After Charles left, Linda felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. But that night, Howard Blackwood returned unexpectedly. He came to the cabin after dark, knocking loudly on the door. Linda opened it, her heart racing. "Mr. Blackwood, you said you'd return next week. I've had a change of plans. I need your answer now, Mrs. Cooper. Will you pay the debt, or do I need to take legal action?" Behind Linda, Rose and Billy had woken up and were watching fearfully from their bed. "I need more time to arrange things. Time is money, Mrs. Cooper. Every day you delay costs me interest. I want an answer now." A shadow fell across the doorway. Jacob stepped into view, his presence suddenly filling the small space. "The lady said she needs time," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll give it to her." Howard's smile faltered. "This is a private matter between Mrs. Cooper and myself. Anything involving my employees is my business. You'll deal with my lawyer from now on. Charles Bennett. I believe you know him." Linda saw something flicker in Howard's eyes. Fear? Anger? She couldn't tell. "I see," Howard said coldly. "Well then, I'll be hearing from Mr. Bennett. But make no mistake, Mrs. Cooper, I will collect what's owed to me." After he left, Linda sank into a chair, shaking. Rose and Billy ran to her and she held them tight. Jacob knelt beside them. "I promise you, Linda, we'll figure this out. You're not going to lose your children. You're not going to lose anything. I give you my word." As Linda held her children and looked at Jacob's determined face, she wanted desperately to believe him. But life had taught her that promises could be broken, that safety could be an illusion, and that just when you thought you were standing on solid ground, everything could crumble beneath your feet. The next 2 weeks were some of the most difficult Linda had ever experienced. The fear of losing her children hung over her like a dark cloud. She tried to maintain her normal routine, cooking and caring for Rose and Billy, but the worry was always there, gnawing at her. Charles Bennett, the lawyer, worked quickly. He spent days investigating Howard Blackwood, digging through county records, talking to people in neighboring towns, following every lead. What he discovered made Jacob's suspicions seem justified. Charles came to the ranch on a Saturday afternoon and asked to speak with Linda and Jacob together. They sat in Jacob's office and Linda's hands were cold with nervousness. "I found some interesting information about Mr. Blackwood," Charles began, opening his folder of notes. "He's done this before, at least 4 times in the past 3 years, all in different counties. He targets recent widows, shows up with promissory notes supposedly signed by their deceased husbands and demands payment." Linda felt her heart jump. "So the notes are fake?" "I believe so, but proving it is another matter. The signatures look authentic at first glance. Blackwood is clever. He likely traced your husband's real signature from some document." "Can we prove that in court?" Jacob asked. "Possibly. I've contacted a handwriting expert from the city. He'll need to examine the documents and compare them to other samples of your husband's writing." "Do you have any letters or documents your husband signed, Mrs. Cooper?" Linda thought hard. "I have some letters he sent me when we were courting. And there might be some papers from when we bought our old house." "Excellent. Bring me everything you have. The expert will be here next week." After Charles left, Linda went to the cabin and searched through the small trunk where she kept her precious things. She found the letters David had written her, each one bringing back memories that made her heart ache. They had been so young, so hopeful about their future together. Jacob found her there an hour later, sitting on the floor surrounded by old letters, tears running down her face. "I miss him," she said simply. "David wasn't perfect, but he loved us. He would never have put the children at risk like this. He would never have borrowed money we couldn't repay." Jacob sat down beside her on the floor, something the proper ranch owner probably shouldn't do, but he did it anyway. "Tell me about him." Linda smiled through her tears. "He was kind, patient, he loved to make the children laugh. He worked so hard, sometimes too hard. After Billy was born, he started taking extra jobs, trying to save money. He wanted to buy us a real house someday with a big yard where the children could play. He sounds like a good man." He was, and now someone is using his memory to threaten us. "It's not fair." "No, it's not," Jacob agreed. "But we're going to stop him. I promise you that." Over the following days, the ranch community rallied around Linda in ways that surprised her. Frank's wife, Helen, brought over a basket of preserves and stayed for tea, offering words of encouragement. Tom carved a special wooden horse for Billy, saying every boy needed something to keep his spirits up during hard times. Even the ranch hands, tough men who weren't used to expressing emotions, found small ways to show their support. One morning, Linda found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was $20 and a note that said simply, "For the legal fund." From the crew, she had to sit down and cry. These men, who worked hard for modest wages, had pooled their money to help her. When she tried to return it, Tom shook his head firmly. "You keep it, Miss Linda. You've fed us well, treated us with respect. We take care of our own." The words "our own" stuck with her. She wasn't just the hired cook anymore. She had somehow become part of this ranch family. Jacob was spending more time with her and the children. After the incident with Howard, he made it a point to check on them every evening. Sometimes he'd join them for supper. Other times he'd help Billy with his reading or listen to Rose practice her spelling words. Linda noticed how natural he was with her children, how patient and kind. Billy had started looking up to him, trying to copy the way Jacob walked and talked. Rose had drawn a picture of their family and included Jacob in it, standing beside Linda. One evening, after the children were asleep, Jacob and Linda sat on the cabin porch. The autumn air was cool, and Linda wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "I've been thinking," Jacob said carefully, "about what happens after we clear up this business with Blackwood." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been through so much. You deserve security, stability. I want to make sure you and the children are protected." Linda's heart was beating fast. "Jacob, you've already done so much for us." "Not enough," he said quietly. He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight from the window, his eyes were intense. "Linda, I need to tell you something, and I'm not good with words, so I'm just going to say it plain. These past few months, having you and the children here, it's changed everything for me. This ranch felt like just a place to work. Now it feels like home again." Linda couldn't breathe. She wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. "I know I'm probably overstepping," Jacob continued. "I know you're still grieving your husband, but I need you to know that you matter to me, not just as my cook, but as someone I've come to care about deeply." Before Linda could respond, they heard a horse approaching fast. Tom appeared, looking worried. "Boss, there's trouble. Some men are at the main gate. They're asking for Mrs. Cooper, said they're from the county." Linda's blood ran cold. She stood up so fast she nearly tripped. "The county? What do they want?" "They didn't say, but they've got official papers." Jacob's face hardened. "I'll handle this. Linda, you stay here with the children." "No," Linda said firmly. "If this is about me, I need to be there." They walked together to the main gate. 3 men waited there, one in a suit carrying a folder, the other 2 looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Linda Cooper?" the suited man asked. "Yes. I'm Robert Finch from the county administration office. I've received a complaint regarding the welfare of your children. A Mr. Howard Blackwood has filed a petition claiming you're unable to provide proper care due to financial instability, and questioned your living arrangements." Linda felt the world tilt. "That's not true. My children are well cared for." "I'm sure they are, ma'am, but I'm required to investigate any formal complaints. I'll need to inspect your living quarters and speak with your children." "Now wait just a minute." Jacob stepped forward. "Mrs. Cooper is an employee of this ranch. She and her children live in housing provided by the ranch. They have steady income, and those children are healthy and happy. This complaint is clearly retaliatory. Robert Finch looked uncomfortable. Sir, I understand, but I have to follow procedure. If you'd allow me to see the living quarters? Linda's hands were shaking, but she lifted her chin. Of course. You can see everything. I have nothing to hide. She led the men to her cabin. Her mind was racing. The cabin was small and simple, but it was clean. The children's clothes were mended but neat. There was food in the cupboard. Surely they could see she was doing her best. Robert Finch looked around carefully, making notes. He checked the beds, the food supplies, even looked at Rose and Billy's school books. The children woke up frightened by the strangers, and Linda held them close. Mama, what's happening? Rose whispered. It's okay, sweetheart. These men just need to see that we're fine. After what felt like hours, Robert Finch closed his notebook. Mrs. Cooper, your living conditions appear adequate. The children seem healthy and cared for. However, Mr. Blackwood's complaint also mentioned outstanding debts that could affect your ability to maintain this standard of living. That debt is being disputed in court, Jacob said firmly. My lawyer can provide you with documentation. I see. Well, I'll need to file a report. Mrs. Cooper, you'll be contacted if any further action is required. For now, there's no immediate cause for concern. After the men left, Linda's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cabin steps, pulling Rose and Billy close. They were crying now, scared by what had happened. Are they going to take us away, Mama? Billy asked, his voice tiny. No, baby. No one is taking you anywhere. I promise. But Linda's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her children. This was Howard's revenge for involving a lawyer. He was playing dirty, using her greatest fear against her. Jacob knelt in front of them. He looked at Rose and Billy. Your mama is the bravest, strongest person I know, and I'm going to make sure nothing bad happens to your family. Do you believe me? Both children nodded, even though their faces were still wet with tears. After Linda got the children back to sleep, she stepped outside where Jacob was waiting. She was trying so hard to be strong, but the fear was overwhelming. He's going to keep doing this, she said, her voice breaking. Every time we fight back, he'll find a new way to hurt us. Maybe I should just find a way to pay him, take out a loan somehow. Anything to make this stop. No, Jacob said firmly. He took her shoulders gently, making her look at him. That's what he wants. He wants you scared and desperate enough to pay money you don't owe. We're not giving him that satisfaction. But what if next time they do take the children? What if? They won't, because we're going to end this. Charles thinks he can prove those notes are fake. The handwriting expert comes in 3 days. We're close, Linda. Don't give up now. The handwriting expert arrived on a Wednesday morning. His name was Dr. Arthur Mitchell, and he came from the city with a reputation for being thorough and honest. He set up his equipment on Jacob's desk, spreading out the promissory notes alongside the letters Linda had provided from David. Linda stood nervously by the window, while Charles Bennett and Jacob watched Dr. Mitchell work. The expert used a magnifying glass, special lights, and tools Linda had never seen before. He measured angles, examined pen pressure, studied every curve and line of the signatures. The examination took 3 hours. 3 hours during which Linda could barely breathe. Everything depended on what this man would say. Her children's future, her job, her life. Finally, Dr. Mitchell sat back and removed his glasses. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Rivers, Mrs. Cooper, I'm prepared to provide my professional opinion. Linda's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. These promissory notes are forgeries, Dr. Mitchell said clearly. Skillful forgeries, I'll admit, but forgeries nonetheless. The signature was traced, likely using a light source and thin paper placed over an authentic signature. But there are telltale signs. The pen pressure is too uniform. There are hesitation marks where the forger paused to check his work, and the angle of certain letters is slightly off from Mr. Cooper's natural writing style. Linda's knees buckled. Jacob caught her arm, steadying her. You're certain? Charles asked. I would stake my professional reputation on it. I can testify to this in court if needed. Charles smiled, something Linda had rarely seen him do. Oh, you'll definitely be testifying. Mr. Blackwood has made a very serious mistake. The next few days moved quickly. Charles filed fraud charges against Howard Blackwood with the county sheriff. He also filed a motion to dismiss the debt claim and requested a restraining order to keep Howard away from Linda and her children. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Linda had never been in a courtroom before, and the thought terrified her. But Jacob promised to be there with her, and that gave her courage. The weekend before the hearing, something shifted between Linda and Jacob. The fear and stress of the past weeks had brought them closer, but Linda had been too frightened to think about anything beyond survival. Now, with hope on the horizon, she found herself thinking about Jacob's confession of love. She watched him with her children on Sunday afternoon. He was teaching Billy how to whittle a piece of wood, showing the boy how to carve away from his body, how to follow the grain. Rose sat nearby reading aloud from her book while Jacob listened and praised her improving skills. This man, this good, strong, patient man, loved her. And somewhere along the way she had fallen in love with him too. But the echo of her own words haunted her still. "I'm not pretty, but I can cook and earn a living for my kids." That's what she had told him when she first arrived. She had known even then that she was plain, ordinary, nothing special to look at. Why would a man like Jacob Rivers want someone like her when he could have any woman in the county? That evening, after the children were in bed, Linda found Jacob sitting on the porch of the main house, looking at the sunset. "Can I talk to you?" she asked softly. "Always," he said, making room for her to sit beside him. Linda sat down, her hands folded in her lap. She had practiced what she wanted to say, but now the words felt inadequate. "Jacob, about what you said the other night." He looked at her, his expression open and honest. "I meant every word, Linda, but I don't want to pressure you. You've been through so much, and I know you're still grieving your husband." "I am," Linda admitted. "I'll always love David. He was my first love, the father of my children. But he's gone, and I'm still here. And so are Rose and Billy. We're still living, still needing to move forward. Take all the time you need." Linda shook her head. "That's just it. I don't think I need more time to know how I feel. I think I'm just afraid." "Afraid of what?" She took a deep breath. "When I came here, I told you I wasn't pretty. I meant it. I'm just a plain widow with 2 children and nothing special to offer. You're Jacob Rivers. You own this ranch. You're respected, successful, strong. You could have your pick of women in this county. Why would you want someone like me?" Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face her fully, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Linda, do you remember the first day you came here? You were exhausted from walking 3 miles in the heat. Your dress was patched. Your children were scared. But you stood at my gate and spoke the most honest words I'd heard in years. You didn't make excuses. You didn't try to manipulate me with tears or flattery. You just told me the truth about who you were and what you needed." He squeezed her hands gently. "That's when I first noticed you. Not your face, not your appearance, but your courage, your honesty. And in the months since, I've watched you work harder than anyone I've ever employed. I've seen you put your children first in everything. I've seen you face impossible challenges with dignity. I've watched you turn this ranch house into a home again with your cooking and your kindness." Linda's eyes were filling with tears. "You told me you're not pretty," Jacob continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But you're wrong. You're beautiful, Linda. Not in some shallow way, but in every way that truly matters. You're beautiful in your strength. You're beautiful in your love for your children. You're beautiful in the way you face each day with determination even when you're exhausted. These hands you think are rough and worn." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them softly. "These hands have built a life for your family from nothing." "That's not plain. That's extraordinary." A tear rolled down Linda's cheek. "Jacob, I fell in love with your courage first," he said. "Then I fell in love with your kindness. Then your laugh, the way you hum when you work, the way you love your children, the way you made me remember what it feels like to have a family again. If you think I'm settling for you, you've got it backward. You'd be the one settling for a stubborn rancher who's too set in his ways and doesn't know how to express his feelings properly." Linda laughed through her tears. "You're doing fine with expressing your feelings right now." Jacob smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Linda Cooper, I love you. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you just how extraordinary you truly are." Linda looked at this man who had given her so much. A job when she was desperate, protection when she was threatened, support when she was afraid, and now love when she thought she'd never feel it again. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you fixed the floorboards in the kitchen because you were worried I might get hurt. Or maybe it was when you stood up to those men who spoke badly about me. Or when you sat on the floor with me while I cried over David's old letters. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it did. And it terrifies me because I've already lost so much. I'm afraid to lose you too. You're not going to lose me, Jacob said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here and I'm staying right here beside you. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Linda, I'm not asking you to forget David or to rush into anything. But when this business with Blackwood is over, when the dust settles and you can breathe again, I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I hope you'll think about what your answer might be. Linda knew what question he meant. Her heart knew. I'll think about it, she promised. They sat together on that porch until the stars came out, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. About Jacob's wife who had died, and how he had shut himself off from feeling anything for so long. About Linda's fears and hopes. About Rose and Billy and what kind of future they wanted for the children. It felt right, sitting there together. Natural. Like two puzzle pieces that had finally found where they belonged. The next morning, Linda woke with a sense of purpose. Today was the court hearing. Today they would face Howard Blackwood and end his threats once and for all. She dressed carefully, putting on her best dress, the one she had saved for special occasions. She braided her hair neatly and looked at herself in the small mirror. She still saw the same plain face, the same worry lines, the same work-roughened hands. But she also saw something new in her eyes. Strength, hope, and the knowledge that she was loved, truly loved, for exactly who she was. Rose and Billy came to her, dressed in their school clothes. Are we really going to court, Mama? Rose asked nervously. We are, but there's nothing to be afraid of. Mr. Jacob and Mr. Charles are going to make sure everything is okay. Will the bad man be there? Billy asked quietly. Yes, but he can't hurt us. Not anymore. Jacob arrived with his wagon to drive them into town. Tom had offered to come along for moral support, and Helen had packed them a lunch. Frank and several other ranch hands promised to keep everything running smoothly while they were gone. As they rode toward town, Jacob reached over and squeezed Linda's hand. She squeezed back, drawing strength from his presence. Whatever happened in that courtroom today, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't facing it alone. She had Jacob beside her, the ranch community behind her, and her own hard-won courage to carry her through. The widow who had arrived at the ranch gates 3 months ago with nothing. The courthouse was an imposing brick building in the center of town. Linda had passed it many times, but never imagined she would actually be inside. Her hands were cold despite the mild autumn weather, and her heart wouldn't stop racing. Jacob walked beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Rose and Billy held her hands tightly. Helen had offered to watch them, but Linda wanted them there. They were part of this, and she wanted them to see that their mother could face her fears and win. Charles Bennett met them at the entrance, his briefcase in hand, and confidence in his stride. Everything is in order. Dr. Mitchell is here to testify. The evidence is clear. This should be straightforward. Inside the courtroom, Linda saw Howard Blackwood sitting at a table with his own lawyer. When Howard's eyes met hers, he smiled that cold smile that made her skin crawl. But Linda lifted her chin and stared right back. She wasn't the desperate widow begging at the ranch gate anymore. She had found her strength. The judge was a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Morrison. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Linda found that reassuring. The hearing began. Howard's lawyer presented the promissory notes, arguing that the debt was valid and must be paid. He painted Linda as a woman trying to escape her legal obligations, taking advantage of sympathy for her widowed status. Then it was Charles's turn. He called Dr. Mitchell to the stand. The handwriting expert presented his findings with calm authority, explaining in detail how the signatures had been forged. He showed enlarged photographs highlighting the inconsistencies, the unnatural pen pressure, the hesitation marks. Howard's lawyer tried to challenge the findings, but Dr. Mitchell was unshakable. He had 30 years of experience and had testified in hundreds of cases. His reputation was spotless. Then Charles called Linda to the stand. She walked to the witness chair on trembling legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Charles asked her gentle questions about her husband, about their finances, about whether David had ever mentioned Howard Blackwood or any large debts. Linda answered honestly, her voice growing steadier with each word. "Mrs. Cooper," Charles said, "in the months before your husband's death, did he seem worried about money?" "Yes," Linda admitted. "He was taking extra work trying to save. But he told me it was because he wanted to buy us a house. He never mentioned owing anyone money. And if he had taken out a loan for $3,000, would he have told you?" "Yes. David and I didn't keep secrets about important things. That much money would have been a family decision." Howard's lawyer stood up to cross-examine her. He was aggressive, trying to make her seem confused or unreliable. "Mrs. Cooper, isn't it possible your husband simply didn't want to worry you? That he handled financial matters without consulting you?" "David made decisions with me, not for me," Linda said firmly. "We were partners in our marriage. But you admit you didn't know everything about his business dealings? I knew enough to know he would never put our children at risk by taking a loan we couldn't repay." The lawyer pressed harder, but Linda didn't break. She had faced too much in the past months to be intimidated by hostile questions. She told the truth simply and clearly, and the truth was on her side. Finally, Charles called Jacob to the stand. Jacob described how Howard had threatened Linda, how the county investigation had been triggered by Howard's complaint, how this was clearly a pattern of harassment. When it was all done, Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to review the evidence. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Linda sat between Jacob and her children, holding both of their hands. "It's going to be okay, Mama," Rose whispered. "I can feel it." Linda hoped her daughter was right. When the judge returned, her face was stern. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. Dr. Mitchell's testimony is compelling and credible. The evidence of forgery is clear. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood's pattern of targeting widows in multiple counties suggests a systematic scheme to defraud vulnerable people." Linda felt her heart soar. "Therefore, I am ruling that the promissory notes in question are fraudulent and void. Mrs. Cooper owes no debt to Mr. Blackwood. Additionally, I am issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Blackwood from contacting Mrs. Cooper or her children. Mr. Blackwood, you are also facing criminal fraud charges which will be handled in a separate proceeding. This case is dismissed." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Linda's entire body. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Rose and Billy threw their arms around her and she held them tight. Over their heads she saw Jacob watching her with such pride and love in his eyes that it took her breath away. Outside the courthouse, Linda took a deep breath of fresh air. The world seemed brighter somehow, the colors more vivid. She was free. Her children were safe. The threat that had hung over them was gone. Charles shook her hand warmly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cooper. Justice was served today." "Thank you," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." As Charles drove away, Jacob turned to Linda. "There's somewhere I'd like to take you and the children. If you're up for it, where?" "You'll see." They rode in the wagon to the edge of town to a small house with a white picket fence. Linda recognized it immediately. It was the house she and David had dreamed of buying, the one with the big yard where children could play. "Why are we here?" she asked. Jacob climbed down and helped her and the children out of the wagon. "This house went up for sale last month. The owner moved east. I bought it." Linda's heart started pounding. "You bought it? Why?" Jacob knelt down so he was eye level with Rose and Billy. "I have a question to ask your mama, but it affects you too, so I want to ask you first. Would it be okay with you if I asked your mama to marry me?" Rose's eyes went wide. Billy's mouth dropped open. Then both children started nodding enthusiastically. "Really?" Rose asked. "You want to be our papa?" "I would be honored to be your papa if your mama says yes and if you'll have me." "Yes," Billy shouted. "Yes, yes, yes." Rose threw her arms around Jacob's neck. "We love you, Mr. Jacob." Jacob hugged them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. Then he stood and turned to Linda, taking her hands in his. "Linda Cooper, I know this might seem fast to some people. I know the proper thing would be to wait longer. But I've lived enough years to know that when something is right, you don't waste time. These past months with you and your children have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and warmth and love into a house that had been empty for too long." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's ring. She would have loved you, I think. You have the same strength she did, the same fierce love for your family. Linda's vision was blurred with tears. I'm not pretty, she started to say, but Jacob put a gentle finger on her lips. Don't, he said softly. Don't say that ever again. You're beautiful to me in every way that matters. You're beautiful in your courage, in your kindness, in your strength. You're beautiful when you're covered in flour from baking. You're beautiful when you're exhausted at the end of a long day. You're beautiful when you smile at your children. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. He got down on one knee right there on the sidewalk, holding up the ring. Rose and Billy pressed close to their mother, watching with excited faces. Linda Cooper, will you marry me? Will you let me be a husband to you and a father to these wonderful children? Will you build a life with me in this house or at the ranch or wherever you want? Will you let me love you for the rest of our days? Linda looked down at this good man kneeling before her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate widow to beloved woman. She thought about how Jacob had seen worth in her when she could barely see it in herself. She thought about how he had fought for her, protected her, loved her children as his own. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Jacob stood and slipped the ring on her finger. Then he pulled her close and kissed her gently, sweetly, while Rose and Billy cheered and passers-by smiled at the scene. When they finally pulled apart, Linda was laughing and crying at the same time. I can't believe this is real. This morning I was so afraid, and now you're going to be my wife, Jacob finished. And these children are going to be mine. And we're going to fill this house with love and laughter and everything a family should have. They went inside to look at the house. It needed some work, but it was perfect. 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a yard where children could run and play. Rose and Billy raced from room to room, already planning where everything would go. We can keep the cabin at the ranch as a guest house, Jacob said as they stood in what would be their kitchen. Or you can keep cooking for the crew if you want. But you don't have to. You can choose whatever makes you happy. Linda thought about it. I'd like to keep cooking, at least for a while. Those men have become family. But maybe not every meal. Maybe just dinner. I'd like to have more time for other things. For the children, for you, maybe even for myself. Whatever you want, Jacob promised. That evening, as they rode back to the ranch, Linda felt like she was floating. The ring on her finger caught the last rays of sunlight, and she couldn't stop looking at it.